Hey everybody, for lesson 2, what we're looking at is something a little bit different, right? We've been talking about Richard Nixon for the last couple of days, taking a look at Richard Nixon as president. Remember, he was president from 1968 up until he resigned in 1973 during the Watergate crisis, and then Gerald Ford will be president up until 1976 when he runs for re-election and he loses to a guy named Jimmy Carter. So what we're going to do here is kind of cover what's happening in terms of the economy during Richard Nixon's time in office, right? Nixon, during Ford's time in office from 73 up to 76, and during Carter's time in office, which is going to be from 1976 to 1980. That's the plan. And the reason why we're spending a whole day on just the economics of the 1970s for these kind of three presidents that we see is that American manufacturing, the American economy in the 1970s had a ton of problems. And it's a ton of problems for a couple of key reasons. Because by the 1970s, the United States had become really dependent on oil that was brought in from other countries around the world. Well, what's the big deal? The big deal is, think about it like a drug. America was getting a lot of oil, a drug, from a dealer, the rest of the world, pretty much the Middle East, really cheap. Well, if you're getting a drug that you really like, really cheap, you want a lot of it. So America wanted a ton of oil really cheap. The problem was, a lot of these Middle Eastern countries went to war against another country in the Middle East called Israel. Well, so what's the big deal? What does that have to do with us? Well, the problem is, this organization of petroleum exporting countries, these countries that were sending oil to the United States, they announced that it would embargo or stop shipping oil, petroleum, to countries that were allied with Israel. Well, guess what? That's us. Oil prices in America rose because we were allied with Israel. Take a look at this red line that I have inside the box. This is the price of oil. And you can see it's going along, pretty cheap, right? Going along pretty cheap right here, right? And then all of a sudden, whoa, in the 1970s, the price of oil goes way, way, way up. This means that Americans have less money for other goods. With the rise in prices of oil, just about everything costs more money. Well, if Americans have less money to spend because of a rise in the price of oil, that could lead to some other problems. Let's see what those are. In particular, let's see how some of these problems might have to do with the decline in America of our factories. Manufacturing. It was declining because America was full. And if you drive on the turnpike or if you drive on I-78 and you go out across Pennsylvania, you'll see that we have all over our country, and we really do, all over New York and Ohio and Wisconsin and Detroit and Pennsylvania, we have these old and inefficient factories, and I'm sure you've seen them. Places around the country that look like these two pictures right up over there, right? Places that have these rotting and rusting factories where people used to work and make all of these goods. Well, if we have all of these terribly, factories falling apart, well then we're going to end up buying stuff not from America because our factories are falling apart, but from other countries. Well, if we're buying things from other countries, then our factories don't need to employ people. They can lay people off. You see, we had forgotten that the prosperity that we had in the 1950s and 60s rested on a whole bunch of people working in factories. And it rested on a whole bunch of people getting easy access to raw materials like oil. Well, now all of a sudden, oil is really expensive. All of a sudden, people are buying things from other countries because our factories are falling apart and things are really expensive. And all of a sudden, we're just going to have this huge problem where unemployment is so high and people can't buy things. And prices are rising because the price of oil is going up. You know, if you took a look at these things in particular, what we'll see is that it creates a new kind of problem in America. Yeah, and this new situation that we find ourselves in is called stagflation. See right there, up over there. And it's this idea that prices are really high, inflation, combined at the same time with an economy that's not growing and high unemployment. You know, if you were going to break it down and put it into a kind of like a math equation, economic stagnation, right? We have stagnant consumer demand and high unemployment plus rising prices, inflation, equals something we call stagflation. And this really screws with people in the 1970s because we didn't really think this could happen, that you could have high prices and a recession where people really weren't making things anymore. We didn't expect it to happen. Like, take a look at this chart. First, look at this here in the green. Now, this is what's supposed to happen. First, the blue line. You see how the blue line kind of goes down here? There's this dip. That is how much our economy is growing. Well, it's not, right? There's a dip. Our economy isn't growing. Now, this is between 1982 and 1984. And what we see is a dip. And in that dip, our economy is in a recession. And take a look at what happens to inflation during that time. That's the red line. During the same time growth is down, we're making less stuff, buying less stuff, we're in a recession, inflation goes down, prices drop. Why does that happen? Because people aren't buying. So we lower prices to get them to buy. That's how that works. Prices go down when we produce less. That's pretty much how that works because we're in a recession. We need people need to buy their money. That's how we thought it would work. But something crazy happens in the 1970s. In the 1970s, when production goes down, and there I am coloring in that V in the 1970s, when we're in a recession, we're producing less, inflation is going up. Prices are rising. That's not supposed to happen. This is really, it's really crazy that this should happen. Because why are prices going up if people aren't buying? I mean, that's nuts. And the answer was, in part, because of that oil, where the price of oil was rising dramatically. People were still buying things from other countries. It was pretty crazy. Nixon and Ford try to solve these problems. They try spending cuts. They try tax increases. They try to cut interest rates and loans, and everything fails. Nothing seems to work. They're not able to solve this problem of stagflation. And that means that in 1976, when we have an economy where all this kind of stagflation is going on, it's an opportunity for a governor from Georgia, a guy named Jimmy Carter, to come in and say, I got this. He says, I'm not from here. I'm an outsider. I'm from Georgia. I'm not from Washington. Let me restore honesty to the government. I'm a good guy. I'm from Georgia. Let's get America's economy back on track. Vote for me, a Democrat. Because he says our largest problem is being dependent on foreign oil because the price was going up, up, up. That message really resonates with Americans because of what we just looked at. And because of that, Carter wins the election. And once he's in office, he does a couple of different things. He wants to kind of get us off that imported oil when it causes stagflation, that prices being too high. So President Carter says, we need a national energy program that says we should conserve oil and use renewable energy sources, use coal, use things like solar power to get us off that oil. It creates a Department of Energy to regulate energy consumption and how we create energy. And many of his proposals do fail to pass Congress because it was just too much change too quickly and it was going to cost too much money. But at the same time, it does in fact work to cut our imports. I mean, take a look at what you can see in that chart over there. The highlighted part in red, that's how much oil we bring in from OPEC. And you can see that once Jimmy Carter is elected in 1976, the price or the amount of oil that we import goes down. And it stays down for a relatively good period of time before it starts to rise again under the next president, all the way up through 2005. So Carter's programs, while they do work a little, they do have a tough time actually making long-term change. Now, when it came to how Carter got along with the rest of the world, it was kind of a mixed bag too. Just like his economic stuff with the energy was kind of a mixed bag. It kind of works, but it doesn't work for long. At the same time, he comes up with new ideas too. He says that we need to stop with this whole business of détente with Nixon and Ford. Like, President Carter says, why are we trying to get along with the Soviet Union? Why are we trying to get along with China when these are countries that are brutal and don't support human rights at all? Instead, President Carter says we should be right and we should be just. We should be honest and true and decent when we deal with other nations. We shouldn't lie. We should be honest and true. And he gives two examples. One thing he does is he says, look, we own the Panama Canal. There's no reason why we should own the Panama Canal. We're not Panamanian. We don't live in Panama. Panama should own the Panamanian Canal, and they should get the money from it. The people of Panama should benefit from the Panama Canal. So he signs a treaty in 1978 to transfer control of the canal to the United States. And that's a big deal. Another example would be the Soviet Union. He says, you know what, we're going to stop being friendly with you. In fact, we're not even going to sell you grain. We're going to embargo the sale of grain. Why? Why would we do that? Why would we stop détente? Because the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan. And they're going after another country, and we say you shouldn't do that. That's not right. So, poof, we put an embargo on the sale of grain because it's the right thing to do, according to President Carter. But, trying to always do what's right and true, that doesn't necessarily always work. I mean, it works sometimes. Sometimes, like if you look just above my head, right there, you can see three different flags. You can see the flag of Egypt, you can see the flag of Israel, and you can see the flag of the United States. And that's a really good example of when President Carter was able to use what's right and true to oversee and achieve peace between Israel and its Arab neighbors that just a few years before were at war with each other. And it's called the Camp David Accords, that peace treaty. And that's a really good example, and especially because Israel and Egypt had been bitter enemies for decades. But our relationship with other countries in the Middle East, for example, was not right and true. So Carter allows us, for example, to support a king over there, a guy called the Shah. This is him up here, the Shah, right up here. And the Shah is king of Iran, and that's a big deal because he is a corrupt jerkface. I mean, he is a major oil supplier to the United States, and he does support us, not the Soviet Union, but he is really corrupt. But we support him. Well, that's not right and true. And as a result, a group of students led by a guy named Ayatollah Khomeini, and that's him down there in the bottom right. That's the Ayatollah Khomeini. They lead a revolution in Iran, and they depose, they get rid of the Shah, and take Americans hostage for 444 days as punishment for our support of the Shah. So, Carter has successes and he has failures, but I think by taking a look at this, it kind of gives us an understanding that the economy of the 1970s was really hard, and that foreign relations for America in the 1970s was really difficult too. So it's a good place to pick up, I think, with stuff in class, and we'll go from there.